Let's build ourselves an application window. I'm in Eclipse right now. I've got a Java project called Lesson 6, and I am going to create a new class. So I'm going to right-click on this, click New Class, and I'm going to call my class Sample Frame. Now, I'm going to say that Sample Frame extends JFrame. Notice what Eclipse puts in for me. Public class sample frame extends JFrame. But it couldn't find JFrame, so I'm going to import it from javax.swing. Now, what am I going to do inside this sample frame? I am going to create a constructor. So I do public sample frame. In this constructor, let's give myself one parameter called myTitle, which is a string. And inside here, I have to do all the things that need to happen for a sample frame, a JFrame, to be created. Some of the things that I know are going to happen, that I generally do at the end, I'm going to put in before I forget. I'm going to do set size. Let's make this 200 pixels by 100 pixels. And I'm going to do set visible to true. Okay, that ensures that whatever I do, this window can be seen. Now, 200 by 100 might not be big enough, but I can always adjust that later if I want to. Now, what are some of the things I want to do? I'm going to set the title of my window to whatever got passed in. Okay. Now, how about if I do nothing else except set the title, set the size, set it visible? Let me create my main class, or my main method in another class. So I'm going to do new class, and I'll call this one, what did I call it in lesson B? I called it GUI driver. So let me use the same name. And in this case, I want a public static void main to be created. And all I'm going to do here is have a sample frame. That's the class I just created. Give myself a variable name. Let's be really creative and call it sample frame. And that equals a new sample frame. And I pass in a title. This is my title. I am going to do nothing else right now. Nothing else in my main method at all. And just execute it and see what happens. I press the run button. And let's see if it shows up. Here it is. I've got something here, 200 pixels wide by 100 pixels tall, and it put in a title. This is my title. Okay? And I X out of it. Notice in Eclipse, this little red button is here. My program is still running even though my window is not. So I'm going to stop the program by doing that. And now I'm going to change the code so that whenever anybody leaves the window, the program gets terminated. Remember, we did that by doing sample frame dot set default close operation. If I forget how that's spelled, once I do dot, these are all the things I can do with a sample frame. There's tons of them. But let's find set default close operation. And I pass it an argument. The argument that I used in the example before was JFrame dot dispose on close. Okay. So now let's see what happens when I run this. Oh, what is Eclipse complaining about? JFrame can't be resolved. Okay, that means I'd better import JFrame. Now, let's run this. I still get my same window. This time when I X out of it, you'll notice the program terminates. Now let's go back to the sample frame and do something more than just have a title. For one thing, I want a bigger window. Let's make it, say, 400 by 200, because that wasn't big enough even to see my title. Now let's do some other things. I'm going to get a hold of the content pane. So I'm going to say container content pane equals get content pane. Now I've got a variable called content pane that's going to be the content pane of this particular window that I've created. Now I need to import container from Java AWT. And now that I've got this container called the content pane, I could add components to it. But I don't have any components yet. So let's create some. JButton, we'll call it button1 equals new JButton button1. I've created a button. I haven't put it anywhere on the screen yet. Notice JButton needs to be imported. Let's just put an import up here. Import javax.swing.star and import java.awt.star, and maybe I'll get a lot of these things without having to do them one by one. Okay, let's add that button to the content pane. Content pane dot add button1. Let's see what happens when I run this now. My window's bigger, and I've got a little button here called, well, not a little button, it's a big button. It takes up the entire content pane, called button1, and I can press that button. Now, what would happen if I created two buttons? Let's say I have JButton button2 equals new JButton. And I'll add button2 to the content pane. Let's see what happens when I run this. All I see is button2. Remember that a flow layout has to be, for us, or our layout manager has to be either a flow layout or a border layout or a grid layout. And only the flow layout lets me put more than one component in it. So let's change the layout manager for this content pane to be a flow layout. I'm going to say content pane dot set layout, and I have to give it a layout manager. So I'll pick a new flow layout. Make no other changes than this, and let's see what happens with my two buttons. Let me run it. Now I get button1 and button2 in this area. It put both of them in instead of putting one in that took up the entire space. Now let's play around with, instead of having a flow layout, using a border layout for my content pane. So I'm going to change this statement that says set layout to setting, instead of flow layout, set new border layout. Remember, that's the one that has a center and a north, south, east, and west. So every time I add something, I have to tell it where to add it. So let me get myself some more components to play with. So let's do a J label. That's just a piece of text on the screen. Give myself a name, label1 equals new J label. And I'm going to pass it some text. This is my label. We'll see what that looks like. And I'm going to do J text field, text1 equals new J text field. This is my text field. Text field is something that you can modify. A label you can't modify. And now I'm going to add these things to my content pane, but I'm going to put them in different places. So I'm going to do content pane dot add. Let's add the label. Add label 1, and the place that I'm going to add it to, let's put this in the north part. So I'm going to want to do, let's see, it is border layout dot north. And then let's add my text field in the south area. Content pane dot add label 1, or not label 1, text 1, and add that to border layout dot south. And let's try and add these buttons to the center panel. I put in border layout dot center for each of those. And we'll see what happens when I run this. I press the run button. I've got my label up here in the north area. I've got my text field down here in the south area. Notice I can type here. I can type in a text field. I can't type in a label. But it only put one button in the center. Why is that? Because the center region could only allow one component. The only thing that allows more than one component is if something has a flow layout. So I'm going to put one component in the center, but that component is going to be a panel, and that panel is going to include my two buttons. So let's create myself a panel. JPanel button panel equals new JPanel. Okay, now I'm going to do button panel dot add button 1 and button panel dot add button 2. Then I'm going to add the button panel to the center part of the content pane instead of adding the buttons directly. Let's see what this does. Run it. Label on top, text field on bottom, a panel in the center that has button 1 and button 2. There's only one more thing that I'm going to do in this practice video. I know it's getting a little bit long, but one more thing. Let's take something other than defaults for my buttons and my text and my labels and so on. Let's play around with some fonts and colors, because when you're creating a user interface, let's face it, you want it to look like what you want it to look like. So let me set the font of this text field. I'm going to do text1.setFont. And I'm going to give it a new font. Let's say sans serif. Font.bold. And make it nice and big, 20 points. Okay, and let me change the color of the text. So text1 dot set foreground changes the color that the text is written in. I'm going to change that to color.red. I'm going to do text1 dot set background to, oh, let's make it something hideously gaudy. Color.yellow, so red text on a yellow background. And then let me also just change button 2. Before I add it, let's do button 2 dot set background color dot pink, and let's set the foreground on it to white. Now let's see what happens when I run this. The layout should look the same because I've got all the same components being added in the same places, but I have changed some colors. So what happens when I run it? My label I didn't change at all. Button 2 now has a pink background and white text, and my text field got a bigger font, color red, background yellow. Now, yeah, there's a zillion methods that you can call, and it's hard to remember what the names of all of them are. Don't panic. You're going to begin working on programming assignment 11 right now, in which you're going to design a few GUIs, but I give you 4 complete examples that you can cut and paste from that have comments in them saying what all the lines of code do. So you're going to get a window 1, a window 2, a window 3, and a window 4 that show you using border layouts, using flow layouts, using grid layouts, changing background colors, adding panels and putting buttons on those panels, and so on. So hopefully you were able to try some of this along with me in Eclipse, and if not, you will have 4 working examples that you can play around with, but you should be ready to get started on programming assignment 11 right now. Go ahead and happy programming.